Darktide is one of the few games set in Warhammer 40K that is not centered around an invincible named Space Marine. Instead, the spotlight falls on something far less glamorous. A team of absolute losers. Yep, you heard that right. The squad in Darktide is made up of convicts, lunatics, zealots, barely stable psykers, and an Ogryn whose primary tactical doctrine is hitting things until they stop moving. In other words, not exactly the Emperor's finest. And despite being a squad of criminals, madmen, and what is essentially the Imperium's penal legion all-stars, they keep accomplishing missions that should realistically turn them into a stain on the floor of any Hive city. They fight through hordes of Nurgle-infected guardsmen, cultists, chaos monstrosities, demon hosts, and enough warp nonsense to give even an Inquisitor a migraine. Mission after mission, no matter how suicidal this situation gets, these four inmates somehow manage to pull it all off and walk away alive. Which leaves us with a very intriguing question, my beloved delicious herd. Where exactly do these rejects scale compared to the wider 40k universe? Is cutting through hordes of plague-raiding guardsmen their absolute ceiling, or are these four crackheads secretly capable of punching far higher up the food chain? Could something like a greater demon actually be within their reach? So in today's installment of POWERSCALING PEEPS, we're going to break down who the Darktide Rejects actually are, the weapons and abilities they bring to the table, the feats they have across the many missions of Darktide, and finally, where they realistically scale compared to the 40k universe. As always, let's jump straight into the go hole. Say it with me, herd. It's time to power scale. So first things first, what exactly is Darktide? At its core, Darktide follows a group of convicted criminals who are forcibly conscripted into an inquisitorial warband run by Inquisitor Grendel. Rather than being executed or left to rot in a prison cell, these inmates are given a slightly more productive role, being thrown directly into a war zone. More specifically, the massive Hive City of Hive City Tertium on the planet of Automata Prime, which has recently fallen into anarchy due to a massive uprising and corruption spreading through the lower levels of the city. The culprits behind this mess are the heretical cult of Admonition and the traitorous Mobian 6th Regiment, who have unleashed a horrifying plague engineered by the Chaos God Nurgle. This infection spreads through the Hive like a demonic virus, mutating the population and turning entire sections of the city into a nightmare of rot, cultists, and warp corruption. Under normal circumstances, the Imperium might simply wipe the city off the map with an orbital bombardment and call it a day. The problem is that Tertium is far too valuable to destroy. The Hive City produces an enormous quantity of Mobian steel, an extremely important industrial resource for the Imperium. Yep, economics, baby. The steel market would crash without Tertium. And since Inquisitor Grendel has Mobian steel stock, the Inquisition is forced to wage a desperate shadow war inside the city. If that's not insider trading, I don't know what is. That's where the rejects come in. Not to handle insider trading, but to fight the growing corruption in the Hive City. Their job is to sabotage cult operations, eliminate high-value targets, recover critical data, and slowly uncover the truth behind how the infection spread so far in the first place. All while the Hive continues to descend into further chaos. From a gameplay perspective, the story unfolds across 17 playable missions spread throughout 7 distinct zones of the Hive City, each representing a different layer. Some operations take place deep within polluted industrial sectors, filled with factories and refineries, while others drag the player through cramped hab blocks, corrupted shrines, and massive transit systems, buried inside the Hive's endless infrastructure. Every mission essentially throws the squad into another disaster zone where the objective is simple. Complete the task, survive the endless waves of enemies, and somehow make it back alive. Now we come to the real stars of the video, the rejects themselves. In Darktide, players can choose between 6 different classes, each representing a different kind of Imperial reject pressed into service. The Veteran is your standard Imperial Guardsman, the closest thing this squad has to a normal trained soldier. The Zealot is a full-blown religious fanatic, the kind of person who thinks charging into certain death is not only acceptable, but encouraged. The Psyker is your classic Warp Touch wildcard, capable of incredible power, but just as likely to turn themselves into a problem if things go wrong, something I have definitely experienced firsthand. Then you've got the Ogryn, a massive abhuman built like a tank, who isn't exactly the smartest fella in the room, and then of course we have the two DLC additions. The Adeptus Arbites, representing the Imperium's brutally efficient law enforcement, and the Hive Scum, who embody the absolute chaos and survival instincts of the Underhive. These are the people the Imperium has chosen to send into a plague-infested Hive City, crawling with Chaos Cultists and Warp Horrors. Which might explain why the power scaling for these fellows gets quite interesting quite fast. Before we cover them in extensive detail in the next section, I feel like I should address archetypes in the game Darktide. Archetypes or builds are different ways a player can build their specific character. By selecting different skills and abilities, their specific reject will play differently. For example, the Zealot can be modified to be a stealth assassin or a frontline brawler, depending on the choices the player makes. Now of course, this is a fundamental part of the game Darktide, but for the purposes of power scaling, it makes things a little bit too confusing for my cow brain to handle. Because I'd have to go through every single reject's archetypes, one by one, every single combination, and the best team that would come from that, and how those teams would scale.
You're not making any sense at all.
See, you're probably as lost as I am, which is why I didn't include it. So as we move into talking about their weapons, abilities, and powers, I will not be factoring in the many specific archetypes or builds each specific character can have. Don't fret, my little cows, I'm still including their combat, blitz, aura, and other abilities. Instead, each of the rejects can utilize any of their abilities, but they still have the corresponding cooldowns and effects. Now, let's talk about each of their abilities, powers, and loadouts across the game of Darktide. So now we're going to go character by character, explore what makes them effective on the battlefield, how unique their skills are, and the tools they use to take on hordes of heretics. Let's start from the top with the Veteran. The Veteran is a seasoned Astra Militarum soldier, often hailing from a distinguished regiment such as Cadia. They're the classic trained soldier of the squad, highly disciplined, experienced, and deadly with ranged weapons. In Darktide, the Veteran's combat style emphasizes keeping enemies at a distance while targeting high-priority targets. As a Cadian trained soldier, the Veteran is among the best in the galaxy. According to the 10th edition Astra Militarum Codex, the Cadian shock troops are believed by many to be without equal in the entirety of the Imperial Guard, displaying inviolable levels of discipline, excellent marksmanship, and a cynical gallows humor. Cadian soldiers hold true to the tenet that to do your best and to give your life to the Emperor is the highest form of honor. That training, combined with standard Cadian armor, makes the Veteran a highly capable and adaptable soldier in almost any situation. Then we get to his weapons, and I will say that across the game of Darktide, several classes share weapons. So for each character, I'm only going to be covering the ones that are unique to them. For example, the Veteran shares the last pistol with the Psyker and the Zealot, as well as the combat shotgun with all of the classes except the Ogryn. So instead of repeating myself over and over and over again, I'm going to list all of the weapons that all of the classes share right off the bat. Except for the Ogryn, who shares none of these weapons because, he's kind of a giant, he's just huge. Across the game, the classes share the heavy las pistol, the combat shotgun, the recon and infantry lasgun, combat axe, shock maul, braced, infantry and vigilant autogun, stub revolver, tactical axe, assault chainsword, devil's claw sword, combat blade, double-barreled shotgun, bolt pistol, auto pistol, spearhead bolt gun, and the dueling sword. As for his unique weapons, the Veteran has the power sword, the falchion, the Hellbore lasgun, and the plasma gun. So pretty much, the veteran is equipped to engage enemies at almost any range in almost any situation, whether it's picking off priority targets from afar or smashing through enemies up close. Even with such a huge collection of weapons at his disposal, there's honestly nothing that stands out as specifically unique or powerful. He's versatile, but not flashy. Beyond their weapons, the veteran's abilities can really be broken down into one core idea. They're the squad's tactical range specialists. Everything in their kit reinforces that role. Their combat abilities let them shift depending on the situation. Executioner's stance turns them into an accurate killer. Locking onto elites and shredding priority targets. Voice of command leans into team support, staggering enemies and restoring toughness to keep the squad alive. And infiltrate gives them a stealth utility, allowing for sneaking away or clutch revives in the middle of chaos. Their blitz abilities expand that versatility even further. The Shredder Frag Grenade excels at clearing hordes with bleed damage. The Crack Grenade is built for deleting heavily armored enemies and bosses. And the Smoke Grenade provides battlefield control by cutting off enemy sightlines and forcing ranged threats into close quarters. In addition to the veteran's combat and blitz abilities, he or she also has passive abilities, which reward disciplined and high skill play. Like Catch Your Breath automatically regenerates toughness when enemies aren't near, while Be Prepared massively increases ammo capacity, letting them stay in the fight longer than anyone else. Talents like Iron Will and Skirmisher enhance survivability and mobility, reinforcing a playstyle built around accuracy, staying far away from the fight, and sustained ranged pressure rather than brute force. So that is the veteran. Next, we have the Screaming Zealot, a fanatical, pious warrior whose rage in the Emperor's name drives them to do what most would consider impossible. Zealots grow stronger as their bodies tire, channeling their faith into holy wrath that empowers every attack. This hints that their power may be in some way enhanced by the Emperor himself, which would be quite insane, folks, for power scaling purposes. In the Warhammer 40K universe, there are numerous examples of faith acting as a literal shield. When a demon feeds on fear to gain strength, a believer who denies that fear can weaken it. And in some extreme cases, an individual with enough faith, either from themselves or inspired by others, can even ascend to the level of a living saint, effectively becoming a near-angelic figure in combat, empowered by the Emperor's light. As a benchmark for the power of faith, we have this excerpt from the book Faith and Fire, which describes a battle sister and her conviction to the God Emperor. Legend had it that the faith of the Adepta Sororitas was so strong that no psyker could ever break their conviction, that only the most monstrous of the witchkin could threaten their purity. It was said that when a sister was at her most pious, when she was at the moment of most virtuous sacrifice to the God Emperor's spirit, the shield of faith that surrounded her could turn any blow from the mind of the aberrant and unholy. This suggests that the Zealot could potentially scale far higher than we might initially expect, possibly even beyond what some psychers could contend with. There is even evidence to suggest that the entire Misfit gang is protected or empowered by the Emperor, such as the psyker repeatedly talking to someone called the Beloved,
The return of Raboot Coolie Man has made my beloved very happy.
who folks like to think is the Emperor guiding them from the warp, or the fact that the Rejects have yet to be infected by Nurgle's plague, even though they've been fighting in the midst of infected beings across many missions. Personally, I think only the Zealot has the potential to be empowered by the Emperor, because the Zealot's abilities already seem to suggest that they're empowered in some capacity by their faith in the corpse god. While it is plausible that the other 5 may have some connection to the Emperor in some degree, there is no real evidence from the game to suggest that they're actually empowered by the Emperor in some way. So when we talk about faith in Darktide, I'm only going to consider the Zealot empowered by it. Sorry folks, sorry, but this isn't Theory Hour on a Fallen Cow. So keep that in mind as we continue. When it comes to their weapons, the Zealot favors brutal, close quarters options that emphasize their aggressive playstyle. Since I already went over all of the weapons shared across all the classes, I'm not going to do it again. But we are going to talk about the Zealot's unique weapons. the Flamer, the Thunderhammer, the Relic Blade, and the Heavy Eviscerator. While they share a ton of different weapons with the other classes, these 4 signature weapons allow the Zealots to carve through enemies with Holy Fury and Fire. In fact, the Zealot's entire kit revolves around one core identity. They are a high-risk, high-reward melee berserker who thrives in the middle of combat. Their core abilities reflect this perfectly. Fury of the Faithful lets them instantly close distance, restoring toughness and turning them into a whirlwind of critical hits and attack speed. Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude shifts them into a support role, staggering enemies while reinforcing allies with toughness and temporary immunity. Meanwhile, Shroud Field gives them a more tactical edge, allowing for stealthy movement and devastating backstab damage against high-priority targets. Their blitz abilities further reinforce this aggressive, close-range playstyle. The Stun Storm Grenade locks down entire groups of enemies, creating openings for revives. The Immolation Grenade blankets entire areas in fire, melting hordes and controlling space. And then we have the Blades of Faith, which trade explosives for precision, giving the Zealots a fast but accurate throwing knife. But what truly defines the Zealot is their passives, which push them to an even higher limit. Abilities like Desperation increase their melee damage for missing endurance, while Martyrdom rewards them for fighting on the brink of death by boosting damage as their health drops, until death gives them a second chance in dangerous situations, granting brief invulnerability instead of going down. So pretty much, the Zealot is a screaming frontline brawler and possibly a living saint. After the bald, screaming fanatical Zealot, we move on to the Psyker. In Darktide, the Psyker, specifically the Psykinetic, is a rogue Psyker, considered a witch who survived capture by the Black Ships and narrowly avoided execution. While not fully sanctioned by the Imperium, the Inquisition employs them out of necessity, which already makes scaling them a tricky proposition, as Psykers in the 40K universe are notoriously difficult to scale. On one extreme, you have figures like a Skandar Kaon, who can literally hurl entire ships, like we see in the book The Talon of Horus. It's smashed into the earth with the force of the War God's axe. The Talok was almost 2 kilometers and 8 megatons of ancient ironclad anger, and then I hurled it right into the heart of the 3rd Legion's fortress. On the other end though, some Psykers simply overload and die when trying to use their powers. So when considering the Darktide Psyker, the real question becomes, what level of Psyker are we actually dealing with here? And to figure that out, we need to talk about the assignment. The assignment is what the Imperium uses to grade Psykers. It's a 24-point scale based on the Greek alphabet, ranging from low level, like Rho or Pi, where abilities are weak or sporadic, up to Alpha Plus, where Psykers are devastating and nearly unstoppable in power. So using this system, we're going to grade the Psyker from the game Darktide. But I would like to emphasize that factors like distance, raw power, and psychic boosting materials or equipment can drastically influence a Psyker's power level. Thankfully, we already have some solid reference points for what different Psyker grades look like. In the Eisenhorn series, for example, Eisenhorn starts off as what he calls a middling Psyker, able to use moderate range telepathy, mind reading, and picking up psychic echoes from objects. Over time, especially with tools like staff-based channeling, his telekinetic abilities grow significantly. Similarly, Gideon Ravenor begins as a Delta grade Psyker, already capable of long-range telepathy, remotely controlling acolytes, and limited foresight. With specialized life support systems and psych reactive enhancements, Ravenor can scale far higher, showing that he can scan the minds of thousands across a Hive city. Both of these Psykers, though, are graded as Delta grade. So while they have a diversity of Psyker abilities, they are not too powerful as to warrant a higher grade. They are not on the same level as, say, the Emperor, Magnus the Red, or Malcador the Sigillite. So where does the Darktide Psyker end up? Well, for our purposes though, we can mostly ignore in-game boosts like staffs and focus on the core abilities of the Darktide Psyker. The player-controlled Psyker seems to have 3 standout attributes, outside of pure gameplay mechanics. First is willpower. The psyker can use their abilities constantly, even in the presence of demonic entities like a demon host or a beast of Nurgle, without immediately succumbing to insanity. That alone puts them above weaker psykers. They can block out intrusive warp voices and maintain focus under extreme psychic strain, all of which shows off how strong their mental fortitude really is. Second is telepathy. The psyker can casually read the thoughts of those around him, teammates, enemies, and even bosses. They can sense pain, intent, and sometimes even detect incoming hordes before they arrive, only expressing surprise when they fail to do so. That level of psychic awareness is honestly really impressive, and shows a strong baseline in mental projection and perception. I mean, the guy literally breaks the fourth wall in-game.
I'm sensing rage, fear, and foreshort and licemen. No, not foreshort and licemen. I said foreshort and licemen. Why are you not paying attention? Look at me, not them.
And finally, their mental endurance is extremely high. They can chain abilities repeatedly in combat without instantly burning out or losing control, something that would cripple or kill weaker psykers. This allows them to consistently output high levels of psychic damage using their abilities like Brain Burst or Smite against a vast array of unique enemies, including hordes or elite bosses. So when it comes to grading the Darktide Psyker, they likely sit just below the level of a Primaris Psyker. Realistically, something in the Eta, Zeta, or maybe Epsilon range makes the most sense. They're clearly capable of using psychic abilities reliably and independently, and they're relatively sane, which is actually a key indicator of a lower to mid-grade psyker. In 40k, the stronger the psyker, the harder their powers are to control. So the fact that this psyker can operate without dying or exploding suggests that they're powerful, but not anywhere near the top tiers or grades of the psychic scale. Still, Eta, Zeta, or the upper ends of Epsilon are quite a high grade for a psyker, and make the power scaling discussion around this fella specifically even more interesting. But enough with the grading hypotheticals. Let's talk about the psyker's unique weapons. The psyker's unique weapons include the Inferno Force Staff, the Void Blast Force Staff, the Electrokinetic Force Staff, the Blaze Force Staff, the Blaze Force Great Sword, and the Void Strike Force Staff. Damn, say some of those 10 times fast. Alongside these, they can also wield standard weapons similar to the other classes, though I won't be listing them yet again. I may be a hardworking cow, but I am not that hardworking. Once I finish this video, Papa Cow is gonna go hit legs. Lightweight, baby, lightweight!
Heavy ass weight. No! I do it though!
Essentially though, the Psyker in Darktide functions as a high damage, low durability glass cannon with several devastating abilities to boot. Since the Psyker does not get a grenade, he gets 3 unique abilities instead. First is the Brain Burst, or the Brain Rupture, which channels psychic energy to crush an enemy's skull. Then we have Smite, a lightning attack that chains between enemies, dealing damage and stunning in a large radius. And finally, we have Assail, which throws psychic daggers that pierce multiple targets or act as homing projectiles. This is by far my favorite one to use, as I feel like Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Time to suffer.
Then he has 3 combat abilities. First, Venting Shriek, which creates a shockwave that staggers enemies and reduces peril by 50%. Don't worry guys, don't worry, we're going to cover peril in a second. Then he has Scryer's Gaze, which buffs ranged and melee damage while increasing peril over time. And finally, he has a Telekinine Shield, which deploys a protective dome that shields against incoming fire. But since we're talking about the Psyker's combat, blitz, and passive abilities, we need to talk about the game mechanic, Peril. Pretty much, Peril is a currency or percent that builds as you use more and more psychic abilities. At 100%, the Psyker explodes. So a core part of playing the Psyker is managing the Peril bar. Because of this, the Psyker's passive abilities are all about managing that risk while maximizing damage output. Mechanics like Warp Siphon reward psychic kills with stacking damage buffs, while Battle Meditation and Passive Quelling help reduce peril and keep them in the fight longer. While other passives, like Kinetic Deflection, even lets them block using peril instead of endurance, giving them a surprising amount of survivability. So if the Psyker is managing his peril bar and staying far away from close combat, he is an unstoppable force of psychic devastation. Then we come to the Ogryn, the last of the original launch classes, and easily the most physically imposing of the bunch. Ogryns are massive abhumans bred and utilized by the Astra Militarum as shock troops. They are incredibly strong, fiercely loyal, and not exactly known for their intelligence. Their approach to combat is simple. Rush headlong into the enemy, pick a target, and beat it into the ground while relying on sheer toughness to survive whatever hits back. And that simplicity works, because Ogryns are absurdly strong and durable. They can shrug off injuries that would instantly kill a normal human, and they tower over standard soldiers, often even rivaling or exceeding an Astartes in size. While Space Marines have a massive advantage in speed, skill, and precision, Ogryns make up for it in raw strength. A perfect example of this comes from an older Astra Militarum Codex, specifically the 3rd edition, where the Ogryn Nork literally drags a Chimera, a vehicle weighing around 38 tons, out of a ditch and carries it 20 yards just to deliver a medkit, simply because, as he puts it, he was scared. When Colonel Grease was injured during the action, he ordered Nork to retrieve the medkit from his Chimera, which had taken damage and was perched upended in a drainage ditch. Nork proceeded to drag the Chimera out of the ditch and 20 yards down the road to the injured colonel because, as he put it, "The medkit is in the carrier, sir." And folks, it's not just strength. Ogryns are also durable as hell. In Dark Apostle, we see an Ogryn take sustained bolter fire, rounds that would shred through armored infantry, tearing chunks of flesh from his body, and he still doesn't slow down. Bolter fire raked towards him, striking the hulking abhuman, who grimace in pain. Chunks of flesh were torn from its arms and chest, but the 3-meter creature that dwarfed even the Terminators did not slow. It lowered a shoulder and smashed into one of the enemy, knocking it from its feet. Raising the butt of its heavy ripper gun, the Ogryn began caving in the helmets of the fallen warrior, smashing it down on the prone traitor again and again. So while Ogryns might not be the sharpest tools in the shed, they are undeniably some of the most dangerous in terms of physicality. Their arsenal includes the kickback shotgun, various bully clubs, the iconic Ripper gun, twin-linked heavy stubbers, battle maws, slab shields, gauntlets, shovels, pickaxes, power mauls, and cleavers. Many of these weapons are oversized or specifically designed for Ogryn use. And surprise, surprise, the Ogryn's abilities fully reinforce his role as the team's frontline anchor, built around crowd control, durability, and protecting his allies. His combat abilities let him dictate the flow of battle. Bull Rush allows him to charge through enemies, knocking them aside, to break formations or reach down teammates, while Point Blank Barrage turns him into a walking turret, massively boosting firing rate so he can shred hordes or even bosses at close range. Then there's the wonderfully simple but very effective Big Friendly Rock.
Really?
And it's literally what the name suggests. It's a giant friendly rock you chuck at people, and it's probably named. This gives him a reliable way to instantly delete high priority targets like snipers or bosses without wasting ammo. The Ogryn, alongside these options, has explosive abilities like Bombs Away, which chucks a grenade box, which can wipe out entire clusters of enemies in a pinch. What really sets the Ogryn apart though is how his passive abilities shape his playstyle, with traits like Heavy Hitter, which increases heavy melee damage, or Stay Close, that increases toughness for him and his nearby allies. While Loyal Protector ensures he can revive teammates even under heavy fire, making him the squad's clutch savior. Pretty much, the Ogryn is the team's immovable object, a walking tank that combines absurd strength, ridiculous durability, and crowd control into one massive, unintelligent package. Then we get to the 2 DLC characters, starting with the Adeptus Abilties, representing the Lex Imperialis, the Law of the Imperium, The Abilties are its most valuable enforcers, known as the Arborators. These are individuals who are utterly unforgiving of those who dare to break the Imperial law. They are swift, brutal, and absolute in their judgment, delivering punishment to anyone who threatens the Imperium's order. That said, while Abilties are well trained and equipped with high quality gear, they aren't quite on the same level as a frontline soldier like the veteran. They're more akin to law enforcement taken to the extreme, essentially Judge Dredd in 40K. Their expertise lies in crowd control, suppression, and enforcing order, rather than a traditional battlefield. When it comes to the Abilties' weapons, they have access to many of the standard tools shared across other classes, but they also possess a set of unique gear tailored to their role as riot control enforcers. These include the Shock Maul Suppression Shield, Abilties Shock Maul, and the Exterminator Shotgun. One of the most defining features of the Abilties is their Cyber Mastiff, which is a cybernetically engineered attack dog designed for war. The Cyber Mastiff can be commanded to disable high-value targets, tear through enemies, and provide support to the Misfits. It automatically prioritizes elites and specialist enemies, especially those threatening the player, making it an incredibly valuable and good boy. The Abilties also brings a strong set of combat abilities. First is the Nuncio Aquila, their default ability, which deploys a loudspeaker that broadcasts the Imperial law, buffing allies while staggering nearby enemies. Castigator's Stance is second, which transforms the Abilties into a juggernaut, reducing incoming damage and increasing their physical presence, though it removes the ability to sprint. And third is Break the Line, a fast but short-range lunge that uses their shield or weapon to bash and stagger enemies across a wide area. As for their blitz abilities, the Abilties Grenade is a high-damage explosive that causes significant stagger in enemies. The Voladic Shock Mine deploys an electric trap that stuns and damages enemies over time, and Remote Detonation allows the Abilties to trigger an electrical burst around their Cyber Mastiff, turning it from simply an attack dog to an explosive attack dog.
Wow!
As for their passive abilities, Force of Will grants toughness when staggering enemies, Hammer of Judgment increases attack speed after hitting multiple enemies, and Suppression Protocol improves survivability when engaging groups. Finally, Target the Weak boosts melee damage against staggered enemies, synergizing perfectly with their crowd control focus. So while Abilties are not traditional soldiers, they are enforcers of order, built around control, durability, and punishing those who step out of line. They truly are Judge Dredd in the grim darkness of the far future. Finally, we have the newest addition to the roster, the Hive Scum. These are born and raised criminals from the depths of Tertium's underbelly, often serving as high-ranking enforcers for local gangs and cartels. Street smart, ruthless, and often completely unhinged, Hive Scum rely on unconventional tactics, dirty fighting, and brutality to stay alive in a hive that's constantly trying to kill them. The Hive Scum also brings a unique arsenal of weapons to the game, including dual stub pistols, dual auto pistols, the needle pistol, the crowbar, bone saw, and shivs. Yep, you're literally running around shivving Nurgle-infested enemies. I wonder how effective that is.
I'm the baddest dude.
Unlike the more standardized weapons of other classes, the Hive Scum is using a literal shiv to kill the enemies of mankind. It doesn't get better than that, folks. And just like the weapons they bring, the Hive Scum's passive, blitz, and combat abilities are all unique as well. They wield Desperado, which allows them to instantly swap and reload their weapon in hand, gaining immunity to ranged attacks and free sprinting for a short duration. Rampage, which is a melee-focused ability, giving them 50% more melee strength, 20% attack speed, and 25% damage reduction for 10 seconds. And Stim Supply, which deploys a medical crate that heals corruption, and if a stim is equipped, it shares its effects with nearby allies. As for their blitz abilities, they have 4. Blinder, which is a fast-throwing grenade that blinds and staggers enemies. Blackout, an upgraded blinding grenade that creates a larger area of effect. Chem grenades that are toxin-filled canisters that explode and leave a lingering toxic area. forcing enemies to take damage over time and die with a volatile explosion. And finally, the Hive Scum has the Boombringer, a high-powered missile launcher. So that is the Hive Scum. He's fast, he's aggressive, and he's unpredictable in close quarters. He may lack the discipline of a veteran or the durability of an Ogryn, but he makes up for it with speed, adaptability, and the willingness to fight as dirty as possible to come out alive. But abilities, weapons, and loadouts only tell part of the story. Because in Warhammer 40K, what really matters isn't what you can do, it's what you've actually done. So now that we've broken down their powers, weapons, and abilities, let's take a look at the Darktide Misfits feats and see just how far these lunatics have really pushed themselves across the game. Darktide's narrative campaign is built around 17 structured story missions, and across these missions, the Rejects encounter over 25 unique enemy types, ranging from basic hordes like poxwalkers and groaners to elite and monstrous threats such as the Chaos Spawn, Demon Host, Plague Ogryn, Beast of Nurgle, and Scab Captain. Each of these monsters presents its own deadly challenge. The Demon Host in particular is arguably the most fearsome in the game. These are humans partially possessed by demons, and their power level depends heavily on the entity within. I will say though that in Darktide, the Demon Hosts are likely the result of rushed or failed rituals by the Mobian 6th or the other cults of Nurgle on world, which explains why they often appear dormant and struggle to control their hosts. Unlike fully bound name greater demons or demon princes in wider 40k lore, such as Cherbil, a demon prince in the Eisenhorn series who can obliterate enemies with a touch or even destroy a Chaos Warlord Titan, the Darktide demon hosts most likely contain minor demons, probably hailing from Nurgle's Garden. This is further supported that before being activated, players can hear the host whispering and crying out for mercy, such as when they say, "Merciful Emperor, why have you forsaken me?" showing that a human soul is still partially present.
Love the Emperor, for he is the salvation of mankind. No, I won't. I shan't. You can't make me.
A sign of an imperfect or newly created demon host. There's also the fact that none of these demon hosts are even named, further supporting that they're probably possessed by minor demons. Despite this weaker possession, their fast, soul-draining attacks can still down players in moments. And I'll admit, seeing one on the map usually makes me shit myself.
He's just standing there, menacing!
Other powerful enemies include the Karnak Twins or the Scab Captain, which demand teamwork, high damage setups, and force the Misfits to leverage every ability at their disposal. These foes are almost certainly empowered by Nurgle's corrupting influence, which significantly enhance their physical capabilities, such as their strength, durability, and regenerative abilities. A Scab Captain, for example, can shrug off attacks that would fell an entire squad of regular PDF troops, while the Karnak Twins move with the speed of elite veterans, hitting hard enough to stagger even heavily armored rejects like the Ogryn. These enemies are rarely handled by damage alone. They become a strategic puzzle, requiring timed abilities, crowd control, and careful positioning to chip away at their health while avoiding devastating attacks. In a single campaign run, all of these missions, a team might stack up around 51,000 kills, which is roughly 13,000 per player, with elite units like the Mobian 21st Regiment alone accounting for thousands of those deaths. Monster encounters pepper these missions with 2 to 3 major boss fights per game, with each of them having the capacity to wipe out the Misfits if they're mishandled. These are numbers that even a Space Marine might not be able to achieve. When you look at it that way, the Rejects aren't just surviving waves of poxwalkers. They're consistently taking down some of the toughest and deadliest creatures in the universe. From Demon Hosts to Chaos Spawn, these characters can take them down, making their feats not just impressive in the context of Darktide, but in the scale of the entire 40k universe. Yep folks, that's right. It's time to scale them against the rest of their universe. As always, we're breaking out my favorite tool in the entire galaxy, a Cow's Power Pyramid to see where these homeless dudes stack up against the rest of the 40K universe.
Spare change. Spare change, ma'am.
Squidward? Squidward, is that you?
We'll be using the usual tiers, except with the addition of a new one to fit this video alone, with the exclusion of planetary and multiversal, because there's no way in hell these rejects are hitting that hard. That'd be a little too ridiculous even for your favorite cow. So let's go over the tiers we'll be using in today's video. First, we have Grunt tier, the newest addition to a Cow's Power Pyramid. This tier includes the baseline cannon fodder of the galaxy, Astra Militarum captains, Orc warboys, empowered human chaos champions, and at the very top of this tier comes standard space marines. After that is the Chapter Master tier, the upper ceiling of mortal space marines. This includes Orc war bosses, Tau commanders, and of course, Space Marine Chapter Masters. After that is the Enhanced tier. This is the tier for warriors who push beyond standard Astartes limitations through genecraft, psychic ability, or specialized training. This includes Grey Knights, Custodies, and most Demon Princes. Then we have the Low Primarch tier. Entities found here are operating at the lower end of the Primarch power level. This includes Greater Demons and Avatars of Cain, as well as the weaker base Primarchs, like Alfarius, Omegon, Lorgar, and Gilliman. After that is the High Primarch tier, the pinnacle of martial prowess within the Primarch spectrum. These are Primarchs like Sanguinius, the Lion, Horus, Conrad Kurz, or Leman Russ. And finally, we come to our final tier, Beyond Primarch. These are beings whose power exceeds even the Primarchs individually. This tier includes Catan Shards or the Demon Primarchs. So with our tiers laid out, let's begin as always by ranking the entire Rejects team compared to the rest of the 40K universe. When taking into account their insane feats they have across the game Darktide, which to summarize entails 51,000 kills, which means around 13,000 per player, which includes both fodder and elite enemies, like Poxwalkers, Corrupted Guardsmen, Beasts of Nurgle, Plague Ogryn, Chaos Spawn, Demon Hosts, and even timed boss fights like the Karnak Twins or the Scab Captain. Most of these enemies are enhanced by Nurgle in some way, shape, or form, giving them enhanced strength, durability, and regeneration, truly upscaling the feats the Misfits have across the Darktide game. So the question is, where does the entire team lie with all of these feats backing them up? Realistically, as a team, I think the Misfits scale to either the top of the Chapter Master tier or the bottom of the Enhanced tier. Although weaker alone, together they have a powerful Psyker, a buffing Zealot, a strong, durable Ogryn, a supporting Veteran, a enforcing Abilties, and a poisonous Hive Scum Hobo. Together, they could definitely kill a single Chapter Master, Orc war boss, or Tau Commander. And maybe, just maybe in the right situations, a Grey Knight, but I think they definitely stop at a Custodies. Because even with the Psyker's Brain Burst abilities or their Smite ability, the Custodies would blitz him in a moment, taking out the team's strongest member, so the bottom of the Enhanced tier seems fair for the entire Misfits team. But what about individually though? Where do each of them land? Well, let's start with the Veteran, Judge Dredd, and the Hive Scum. These three are essentially your standard Imperium infantry. They're competent fighters, able to hold their own in a firefight or close quarters, but without physical enhancements, faith, or psychic abilities. They're just kind of your ordinary humans, backed up by weapons, in-game abilities, and their gear. Still, they've proven themselves against monstrous and elite opponents in Darktide, helping bring down Chaos Spawn, Demon Hosts, and even Beasts of Nurgle, all of whom are extremely dangerous foes. Chaos Spawn are roughly equivalent to 1 or 2 Space Marines, depending on the circumstances, while Demon Hosts are stronger still, comparable to a small squad of Space Marines. The Beast of Nurgle is an embodiment of plague and decay, able to rot flesh, corrode metal, and reduce even the most durable humans to dust simply by being near them. That the Rejects can take on these types of foes even with teamwork and come out alive and victorious puts them at the very minimum at the high end of the Grunt tier. So the real question becomes, could the veteran, Abilties, or Hive Scum take on a Space Marine who gatekeeps the top of the grunt tier? If we factor in playstyles alongside their feats and weapons, the veteran is primarily a ranged fighter, relying on precise and accurate firepower. In a direct fight against a Space Marine in a one-on-one situation, the veteran would certainly lose, unless he lands a lucky shot with his plasma gun while the Executioner's stance ability is active. Space Marines have been shown to be able to react in fractions of a second, close gaps instantly, and their armor can shrug off nearly every weapon the veteran carries, making this a very tough matchup. Judge Dredd, on the other hand, is a brawler and enforcer who utilizes his attack dog to lock down enemies. If we also compare him to the gatekeeping Space Marine at the top of the grunt tier, the Abilties would try to close distance using his assault shield, maul, and attack dog to hammer down his opponent. Even then, if there were 10 separate encounters, he would probably lose all of them.
That's rough, buddy.
However, the Marines' superior strength and speed still dominate this one-on-one. Abilities like Nuncio Aquila could cause fear in the Marine and debuff them, but I don't think that's still enough to secure this victory. We don't even know if this ability would have any impact on the Space Marine at all, since they don't feel fear. This makes the Abilties fight closer than the veterans, but ultimately it's still a losing battle. Maybe a mid-diff fight, but still a loss. Finally, we have the Hive Scum, who specializes in agility, dancing in and out of combat rather than taking on his enemies head-on. Their poisonous weapons offer a distinct advantage, allowing them to chip away at enemies while avoiding prolonged fights. Using dodges, dives, and ducks, from Dodgeball, the Hive Scum can bob and weave around the Marine, but even so, the Marine would probably still have superior strength and speed, allowing them to eventually catch the Homless Hive Scum and beat the shit out of them. It's also questionable whether the Hive Scum poison would even affect a Marine's enhanced immune system. I think all in all, I would say that these three, when taking into account their feats, abilities, playstyle, and weapons, would lose to a normal Space Marine, with the veteran and the Hive Scum likely losing a low diff fight to the Marine, placing them around the middle of the grunt tier, while the Abilties probably has the best chance with his gear, abilities, and attack dog, but still loses, maybe making it more of a mid-diff fight, slotting him towards the top of the grunt tier, but still below the gatekeeping Marine. Like, come on guys, they are still humans without any otherworldly amps or physical enhancements, so the argument is completely fair to place them in the grunt tier. Next up is the Zealot. Fueled by faith, the Zealot gains a massive boost to strength, durability, and combat presence, due to her immense faith. While they share the same feats as the other classes, defeating Chaos Spawns, Demon Hosts, Beasts of Nurgle, and other fodder enemies, their faith amplifies their impact tremendously. With abilities like Fury of the Faithful, Chorus of the Spiritual Fortitude, and Shroud Field, the Zealot is the ultimate frontline brawler, growing stronger the closer they are to death. Of the 4 misfits ranked so far, the Zealot probably has the best shot at taking on the gatekeeping Space Marine at the top of the grunt tier. For example, activating Until Death allows them to survive a hit that would normally be fatal, becoming invulnerable for 5 seconds, which is a serious advantage in this high difficulty matchup. While this might give the Zealot a chance to take down a standard Space Marine, even with her faith, there's no chance they could solo a chapter master like Dante, Logan Grimnir, Calgar, or even a no-name chapter master. Faith grants incredible power, but it's not enough to reliably overcome the most elite warriors. So I would say the Zealot most likely comes in at the top of the grunt tier, above the other misfits, as she has the highest chance of defeating a normal Space Marine, but she definitely stops short of the Chapter Master tier. The Ogryn is unique because he's a different kind of powerhouse. While the other misfits rely on faith, skill, or their weaponry, the Ogryn brings physical strength and unmatched durability to the fight. With the Slab Shield, he can block Plague Ogryn charges, Chaos Spawn swings, and even attacks from the Beasts of Nurgle, allowing him to trade blows with enemies that would toss other misfits aside. This paired with his combat abilities like Indomitable, which knocks enemies down in his path or feel no pain, which provides passive damage reduction and toughness regeneration, all make the Ogryn a near unkillable frontline anchor. And when you bring up lore examples, like from the book Dark Apostle, which shows an Ogryn overpowering a Space Marine, even though it may be an extreme outlier, shows that the Ogryn has a reliable chance against a Space Marine in a one-on-one fight. So I'm going to slot the Ogryn in at the bottom half of the Chapter Master tier. Though he probably can't take on any of the other foes in this tier, like Orc War Bosses, Tau Commanders, or the Space Marine Chapter Masters, his abilities, strength, durability, weaponry, and blocking skill, but the odds of him defeating any of them are slim to none. Finally, we have the Psyker, who is an Eta, Zeta, or maybe even Epsilon graded Psyker, the true wild card of the group. With abilities like Brain Rupture, Smite, and Assail, he can dominate any fight from any range, dealing lethal psychic damage to fodder, elite, and monstrous foes. He could probably take out a Chapter Master, Orc War Boss, or Tau Commander by targeting their mind directly, and then popping their skulls. This tracks with his in-game usage of his psychic abilities, because they're able to damage high-tier foes like the Chaos Spawn or the Beast of Nurgle, which implies he can do the same with other entities like those found in the Chapter Master tier. But he remains far below a Grey Knight or a Custodes, who combined psychic might with superhuman physical capabilities. In direct combat, a Grey Knight would crush him, and a Custodes would outright blitz him before Brain Burst could take effect. So I would say the evidence points that the Psyker sits at the top of the Chapter Master tier, excelling through psychic supremacy rather than their durability. So that's it, folks. To summarize, we've placed the Misfits across a Gauss-Bauer pyramid like this. As a team, they sat at the back of the enhanced tier, maybe over a Grey Knight, but that is up for debate. Individually, the Veteran, Judge Dredd, and the Hive Scum sit at the middle of the Grunt tier. The Zealot scales slightly above all three of them, due to the boost from Faith. Though they are still not capable of taking out a single Space Marine, they sit at the top of the Grunt tier. The Ogryn sits at the bottom of the Chapter Master tier, thanks to their ability to trade blows with monstrous and elite foes. And finally, the Psyker sits at the top of the Chapter Master tier, as they are able to take out high-level foes at any range. But they are still far below a Grey Knight or Custodes in straight-up combat. Honestly, the main reason the Misfits don't scale anywhere near characters like Malum Kaido or Shusla Tau Case comes down to two main points. First, the enemies they fight are nowhere near as powerful. Malum Kaido faced 8 greater demons across Bolt Gun, and Case faced down 1 across Fire Warrior, which automatically places them at a much higher tier. Second, the Misfits don't take down their foes by themselves. They take them down as a team, meaning no single character is responsible for these kills. If you account for different sessions and playstyles, from a traditional Darktide viewpoint, it's simply less impressive for 4 Misfits to take down these threats than it is for a single Space Marine like Malum Kaido ripping through 8 greater demons on his own. Their teamwork is essential, and while it makes them deadly as any other group, it inherently limits their individual scaling compared to a single powerhouse character in the wider 40K universe. And that's it, folks! That's the Misfits stacked up against the rest of the entire 40K universe. If you enjoyed watching me nerd out about these Homless legends, taking on some of the deadliest and stinkiest threats in 40K, don't forget to slam that like button, subscribe, and hit the ring notification bell so you don't miss any other power scaling blundering videos. A huge shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members: Impossible Paul, Tyler Pick 7, Musty, Keydry, Seth Capizilla, Lag, Cunning Karkle, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, Omar, Altrazon27, and Michael Skipper 7277. I love you all, and I hope you have a big glass of milk on me. For the week of 420, I have 3 videos planned. Yes, that's 3, and they're all centered on one character, Mr. Fulgrim. The first video will be discussing the Lair Blade amp, the second will be discussing how powerful Clone Grim is, and third will be a full video slandering Fulgrim because he sucks and can never lock in and loses to opponents he should be bodying with his statements of how good of a duelist he is, of how fast he is, and supposedly how powerful he should be on paper. But nonetheless, he is a bum, so we will be slandering him for X amount of minutes. So stay tuned for 420 week, featuring our favorite ketamine abusing Fulgrim. As always, my beloved herd, stay milked, stay thirsty, and I'll see you all real soon.